Hi, everyone. Looks like we're live. Welcome to episode number 56 of Exploring Genuine Transformation. My name is Lori Beth, and I am a licensed therapist, and I offer mentorship programs to men and women that combine therapeutic, somatic, and spiritual mentorship. And I have been doing this show for quite a while now. We're on episode number 56. And the purpose of this show is really to dive into what is genuine transformation. And to me, that means transformation from the inside out, transformation from the sake of having more intimacy with self and with life and more fulfillment and enjoyment in life. Not so much, I created this show actually to look at that form of transformation rather than a transformation that is for the sake of getting what you want in life. Sometimes the byproduct of this transformation we're going to be talking about today is that you do get what you want in life, but you're way more filled up and turned on and feel like you in that process. So I'm excited today to be interviewing Elan Freydenson. Welcome, Elan.
Thank you. I feel tender. I feel excited. I feel this kind of like bubbly, what's going to happen energy, and I feel grateful to be invited and to be able to be here.
Yeah. Beautiful. Yeah, I'm really excited to have you here today. I know Elan well personally, and I know his work quite well. And so I'm really excited to be sharing, to have this chance to, for you to share your work and to share your heart and to share it's the work you do, but it's also just who you are as a being and what you are a stand for. So we are going to be exploring Eros and Aliveness. Yay! So really, like, we can say, we'll get into the topic more, but we're really exploring like this, a life force that is inherent to all of us, that we, have the possibility and capability of from birth, that often gets stuck and stifled due to all kinds of conditioning and other reasons, which we'll get into today. And so we're going to be exploring that. And also we're going to be looking at how, for our viewers, for everyone watching, Elan's going to be sharing a lot about how we can reclaim that aliveness and that Eros in our own beings and in all areas of our lives. So I want to introduce Elan before we dive into the topic, for those of you who don't know him. So just what he has, his whole life, like I said, has been a sort of an exploration and a commitment to finding and following this aliveness and this Eros in his own being. But I want to just share a little bit about the training and experiences that he's had professionally. He is a biodynamic craniosacral therapist. He's also studied polarity therapy. He's completed the Castellano perinatal and birth therapy training twice, which is a really potent training. If you don't know anything about that, I would definitely look it up after this interview. And he's a registered somatic movement therapist and an authorized continuum movement teacher. And I'm just going to repeat the first sentence of your bio because I love it so much and it feels so true to you, is that your life is dedicated to freeing yourself and helping others free themselves from the unintended burden of familial, cultural, and ancestral imprinting, which is another, the ancestral piece is a huge part of, I know, what you've studied and also what you'll bring into the conversation. So is there anything that you would add that you want people to know about you before we dive in?
Um, well, I'll say, yeah, one thing that I want to say is that like um, I speak from this place of like not knowing what I'm going to say. And I'm always kind of like listening and speaking at the same time. And I'm also like a very energetic and spontaneous person. And by energetic, I mean I'm listening to the energy in the relating between you and I, Lori. I'm listening to the energy of the space as we speak things, and listening to, like right now, as I look out the window, I see these awesome trees. And there's such a quality of verticalness in them. And then if I kind of like just peek into what's happening below, there's just such a sense of ground and a sense of
Mm.
mutuality between them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, that's what I want to say.
Yeah, well, it's great. You're talking about your own being, but I feel like you're already diving into the topic of aliveness and Eros in, you know, in a visceral way, sort of in a moment to moment way, which is a beautiful way to begin. Um, and I'm sure that that will keep coming through this interview or this conversation as we keep going. Um,
Yeah.
I think a great place to start would be for you to define aliveness and Eros, because they're big words that, we all use, but how you're using them and
Yeah, so aliveness, I would say for me, is the life force that enlivens us, right? It's the life force that moves us, that guides our attention, that guides our thoughts, that guides our actions, that guides our what we do with time and space.
Mhm.
And just to contrast that, I would say Eros, I would call as the movement of love.
Mm.
From
Mm.
one of my teachers, Cass Phelps.
Mhm.
Eros as the movement of love. And sometimes, often when I talk about it, there's a quality that I'm speaking to about pleasure. And I'm not speaking to necessarily the pleasure like in our culture that relates to sexuality, which is inclusive, or I would say a subset of all the energy in life. But Eros for me has a quality of sensuality to it. It has a sense of a lot of intelligence. And yeah, I'll leave it at that for now.
Mm. Mhm. Mhm.
It, it has a quality of nourishment and has a quality of being carried in it.
Mhm.
Um, and for me, it's a quality that really brings me present.
And would you say that that's this kind of presence that you're talking about in care? Would you also, um, would you put those words or that experience to aliveness as well?
I would say aliveness may not necessarily bring us more present. Our aliveness may actually take us out.
Mm. Mhm. Mhm.
In the context of like writing our description of like what are we going to talk about, when I think of aliveness, I think of like the life force and what are we doing with it? Are we constricting the life force? Are we allowing it? Is it triggering something that then the life force goes into what we would call an imprint, right? So the history. Is the aliveness being funneled into a pattern that's ancestral or a childhood survival strategy?
Mhm.
Right. So aliveness, I would say, is like all of life, right? That
Mhm.
carries. And we, in our consciousness, you could say our soul, some people would say our higher mind, higher self, is working in this dynamic with the body and the history to like make our um, to make our impulses happen in form.
Mm.
So just to kind of like delineate a little bit, I hold that each person has an authentic impulse that comes from their soul. Okay? And then on top of that impulse, there may be history, there may be a survival strategy, there may be a multitude of survival strategies, there may be cultural imprinting. And so in the original impulse, it has a particular form of expression, but it may get twisted and turned into a different expression right, as the life force tries to travel through a place which has an imprint in it. And yeah, go ahead.
Well, one thing I love about the way you're framing aliveness is also just that for everyone, it's like, I love that it's the way you're saying it is a particular soul essence, right? Like everybody's aliveness, everybody's like the purity of their aliveness, you could say, before it sort of hits these imprints, which none of us are, I mean, all of us have, obviously, because that's just what it means to be human. But it sounds like there's also like there's a sort of authenticity to each person, and each, you know, the way that that might want to express itself and come alive in each person.
Right. So like you can say that each person has their own kind of essential vibration. I don't like that definition because it limits us to this perception that there's like one vibration that we vibrate at. The reality is that in my experience, that our vibration is very contextual, right? So as we're living life, we're stepping into different contexts. As I sit in the computer and I work, my vibrational essence is kind of dimmed because the computer fundamentally doesn't care about whether I'm emotionally present with myself. It doesn't care how I feel. It doesn't care about anything that potentially a human being that we're being intimate with or close with would care about. So we do different things in different contexts. So there's our impulse, and then there's the intelligence of our impulse in the context that we're in. And then there's the layers of history as well on top of that, and the social cultural conditioning. I'm really interested in meeting the energy that's both in the imprint that allows the original impulse then to come through. And that's a little bit about the kind of the process of actual how the healing happens and the style of work that I do, and in the way that my teacher, and I just kind of want to speak Ray Castellino's name here. He passed away a few months ago, and a month and a half ago, December 13th. And I just kind of want to, I feel a sense of tenderness and a tremendous amount of gratitude for all that he's taught me. And like I would say with him, he holds a context that allows us to step in and allows this, like, both the history and the imprinting to come up, but also the original impulse and essence. It was like kind of the first place where I had a safe container to make sense of everything that I was doing and everything that my body was doing and everything that my nervous system was doing and the whole collection of thoughts that come with who we are that could be rooted in trauma or ancestral or social cultural imprinting.
Can you speak a bit to that process? I mean, I know you've also had other influences, but, you know, if someone was like, I know in so many people, right, that there can be so much conditioning away from aliveness and Eros that, like, throughout one's entire life, that for some, I know that it's just like, it's been so over, like there's so much layered on top of it that it seems like it would be quite hard to even touch on this quality, you know, a quality of aliveness or Eros, and then even that authentic, like the authentic to that person's being and energy. So I'm curious if you can speak a bit, you know, just to the process of, I would call it reclaiming that, or beginning to uncover it and discover it.
Yeah. So you know how like I spoke earlier that like our aliveness comes out in a contextual is always orienting to the context. So our nervous systems as social beings is always orienting to the context that we're in. So as a child, for example, when we're small and like total sponges, we're kind of basically wired to be like, how do I become so that I survive and have love and connection?
Mhm.
And then each family has their dynamics that they work with. And let's say a family is like, you can be joyous and you can be sometimes a little sad, but don't get angry, don't get frustrated, and don't ever judge me or blah, 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 or direct any of that energy at me as a parent.
Mhm.
So the survival strategy in the child contorts itself into the shape that fits into the conditions that are being offered.
Mhm.
But for me, like what I would call like a blueprint childhood would be a case where like all of you is welcome, right? Literally all of you is welcome. And if your parent can't handle what's coming, they go get help to grow and change to be able to show up as a parent that can meet the child and the soul that's coming in. So, so let's assume that doesn't happen and the child grows up and learns that this is the way I need to be. We've already like 30, 20, 40 years later, 50 years later have maybe forgotten the nuances of that environment, but we still walk around maybe not holding on to our anger, not letting our judgments come out, right?
Mhm.
So when you step into an environment like these workshops that Ray was doing and that sometimes I facilitate, the context immediately shifts. Like, so there's a palpable feeling of spaciousness and welcomeness. And if someone gets into that workshop, there's already an intelligence in them that says, I want to grow, I want to change. There's some other version of me that I want to experience.
Mm.
So we tend to that part that has the intelligence that gets you there to begin with. And then we start in this work. In that work, we start with intentions. What do you want? How do you want to experience life? How do you want to experience yourself? How do you want to experience a relationship? And immediately, when you create space for someone to authentically express what it is that they're wanting, the energy just starts to organize to create the conditions to give them what they want. So, and I'll just state it right here. I want to have a really good time talking to you. I want to feel alive and bubbly and be playful in this interview. Um, and I also want to like allow what wants to come through so that the people watching this now and in the future get exactly what they need. That's in the best interest of everyone. Like, that's what I want. And actually pausing on the story that I was saying and answering your question actually would kind of invite, what experience do you want to have in this conversation?
Mm. I'm so immersed in the what you're saying and also the process. Like I have a process comment to what you just said, but let me check into my I think, I mean, I feel this in most interviews. I want to attune to the energy that's between us, that the aliveness. Actually, it's interesting. This topic's about aliveness, but I feel this in almost every interview is like allowing the aliveness to come through, allowing the similar to what you said, like what wants to be um, shared together, but also what wants to be uh, expressed so that it's going to be like a benefit to everyone. And then, yeah, like to also be in this, for me, this is a very relational experience. It's like sort of, and that's where I'm like the most enlivened and excited is, yeah, is in the connection that's happening.
Yeah. So as you said that, especially the part about attuning, I felt a sense of like space opening up, and I
Mm,
felt a sense of like receptivity.
mm, mm,
Felt myself want to like take up more space because I'm being
mm,
received.
mm. Beautiful. Mm. Yeah, I was really the process comment I wanted to make was that as you were shared this in the moment experience of what you were wanting and bringing that into the space as you were, relaying the story about the work that happens that you do and that Ray did. I like it made so it just my whole being was like ding ding ding, like that just makes so that just feels so it's the beginning, right? It's like getting in touch with the desire in the moment that then can allow, like when there is space and when, right, when you're doing the work that you do, or when, we as beings are able to open to the life force and the desire of others around us, like that knowing of what we want, it makes so much sense that then that sort of that starts to create the space that we want, and it also can begin to um, facilitate healing if that's one of the intentions.
Right.
Mhm.
I think actually, like, because this is gonna like, I really think so. A big part of this work is like embryology and studying the like formation of the body.
Mhm.
And if you look at the embryo and you kind of like start to like observe what is going on, you realize that the impulse towards growth is the like primary thing.
Mhm.
And then in our culture, what I was taught was like, we go to school and then we grow to like adulthood, and then somehow the growing like stops or becomes like productivity or making family, and like it has this very particular kind of linear story that I was taught. And,
Mm,
but like one of my like pet things is like the growth never stops, and the impulse to grow never stops, and that force that the embryo has, that all that organizes to grow a body and a nervous system, that's all available to us. That doesn't stop until we decide that we're dissolving or life gets taken from us.
mm,
By dissolving, and I'm using the word dissolve, but I'm really speaking to the dying process, right? And
mm,
so there's two pieces to that. One is that force of growth is always in everyone. In whatever moment we're meeting, we could be meeting at a supermarket. If there's an opening and a welcoming, then it will present itself. And the energy will organize, the conversation will organize, the eye contact will organize,
mm,
the thing that we decide to speak about will organize for deeper connecting, for order, and for what I consider like opening and growth.
mm, mm,
And just one more thing. So like, as you see, like the energy, like one of the principles of kind of the basic principles of the work is this concept of welcome. Aliveness comes when you welcome. One of the things that's needed is to really welcome the whole of the person,
mm, mm,
not just how they are right now, but even also like their entire history, like seeing that a person is like in a moment in time and space, like a collective of their own history, collective of the ancestors,
mm,
collective even of the culture that they were raised in or impacted by.
mhm, mhm, mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to go into that more. I want to just name that when I was speaking before, you did something with your jaw, and then I became aware that my jaw, so speaking to the point that you're making, right? When we make space, like I became, now I'm aware of my jaw, there's some tightness. I'm aware of my belly, there's some tightness, and like sort of that desire for attunement and aliveness in me in this interview is now like I'm now getting to sort of be present to that, and allow it to unwind in a new way. Um, and so anyway, that just speaks to, that was just a moment to moment experience that happened for me, as we've been in this conversation, which I think is the point that you're, one of the points that you're making, that we make the space for that. And then it naturally, you're calling it growth, or we could call it healing, but it's like something in the system begins to reveal itself and unwind to create more, space for the aliveness that's there, because that's where some of my aliveness is getting stuck right now. Yeah.
And just to have a reflective context here, like I too was working with my jaw this morning.
Mm,
The way that um, my head and neck and spine kind of like they want to hook up in a new way. There's like
mm,
an evolving that's happening with this area of my body right now
mhm,
in my process in my life.
mm,
And
mm,
so yeah, and the jaw, like the pelvis and the hips, it's kind of like a mirroring between them.
mhm,
And they're a way that we to talk about our topic. They're a place where we can really
mhm,
constrict the vertical flow of life force.
mhm, mhm, mhm,
So like right now with my hands, for example, I'm just like feeling the edges of my jaw and
mhm.
a sense of like also holding your jaw. Great.
Yeah, so I think this actually speaks to sort of the last thing you said, um, about, making space for sort of our cultural conditioning, our ancestral conditioning. Um, I think this is a great example of it, right? Um, I would love for you to share a bit about when you do make space for that, how you work with it, because I know you're not working with it from the mind. So what we just did is actually like a good representation of it, right? It's like there might be some kind of conditioning that actually relates to my ancestors that could be happening in my jaw, right? For example, or vice versa. And yeah, I'll let you speak to it, but I think that's it's a good example of what we were just doing. That it's we're I think I know that your work is really, I mean, it's working on such a deep level. So it'd be awesome for you to describe how some of that looks.
Sure.
Um, yeah.
I want to do a little technical thing. I want to shift you out of full screen in my context so that I'm actually not looking up to see you
Mm,
and
mm,
make the um, my eyes more in the context of where people are.
okay.
Great.
Yeah.
Where the camera is. Yeah. Cool. Um, can you speak to the question again, just to invoke the energy?
I'd love for you to give people both an explanation of how you work, sort of how you're working with these different components of these imprints or conditioning. And then potentially also, I mean, this is similar, but be able to show what that would look like what, maybe even a little vignette of, I mean, we started to do it, but just more explicitly for people to really get, what this work is. Because we're
Yeah.
talking about it conceptually, right? Like we understand that. Um, mhm,
Yeah. So that leads me to talk about people as storytelling creatures.
mhm,
When we think storytelling, or at least when I originally heard the phrase of storytelling, I would think of people sitting around a fire and like telling a story. But what I got from Ray's work and just from observing life is that people are always telling their story through their body and the way they're living life.
mhm,
And this hit me a while ago is that we have this in our kind of like the healing community, the conscious community is this like whole thing on getting present. Let's get present. Let's get empty. Let's get present into the moment. I'm like, why is that so hard? Like, and then it caused me to like ask the question: do people actually want to do that? And like what from observers from observing and watching, I was like, no, actually, I think the impulse to tell their story is greater than their impulse to actually be present until their story has been received, met, integrated, and then emptiness and presence becomes a lot easier to actually inhabit. So, in the work that I do, the work that Ray does, and the many people that have been trained by him, when people come with a desire. Let's talk about that example we spoke to earlier. I want to be able to express my anger, and I want to feel safe expressing my anger. Right? Someone comes in with that intention because their whole life they don't have access to that fire because of that example of that upbringing. So that becomes their intention, and the energy starts to organize. And we just ask a simple question like, what comes to you to share about what do you remember? What comes to you to share about your experience of not expressing anger?
Mm-hmm.
And so the people start to tell a story. They start to tell a story in words, but as a practitioner in this work, we're listening to the nervous system, we're watching the movements, we're feeling and sensing what is happening, what are they bringing into this space when they tell their story. So the story is mostly being told non-verbally. And so when you listen that way, the person feels something changes in the energy because they're actually being met and received in the telling of their story. Because more often in their life, they're in situations and they're just trying and wanting it to be different, but they're actually not being received by the people around them because it's not a therapeutic context.
Mm-hmm.
And the other piece is slowing down. Our culture, I say our culture, I'll speak to the United States, and many cultures and Western cultures in the world, like moves at a particular pace. And that pace is intentional. This is like a thing for me because I really don't like it because I naturally move at a slower pace because I want to feel everything. But the pace intentionally in the culture and sped up since, the introduction of the internet and technology in the last 15, 20 years is intentional to not feel. So in these workshops and in sessions, we're slowing down to a rhythm where there's actually presence to feel while you're telling the story and for you to perceive that there's another person that's actually receiving you. Because if you go too fast, you will miss all of that. And so a lot of the work that I do and a lot of the work that we do in those workshops is we guide people to slow down, slow down, slow down. It's not by telling them to slow down necessarily. But when that happens, things start to unravel and open. So the nervous system starts to show something. Or they start to get a whole nother memory about the first time that they were yelled at for being angry. And when they do that, their body goes like this, for example. And then we're like, okay, hang out there. What's going on? And then they realize, oh, they were almost hit as a child for being angry. And so we hang out with them, we slow it down. And then the own internal intelligence of the body and that original impulse for more wholeness and more aliveness and more expression, that original impulse that got them there to begin with, has that we all carry this intelligence to like unwind what we're carrying in the right context. And as we do that, we get more and more current. Kind of these places where the aliveness was caught here, like maybe this person their whole life had always shoulder pain, but they didn't understand why. And it's because their body took this shape. Really early on. This is exaggerated, right? But if you're just kind of here and then like your shoulder goes like this a little bit, that's actually how it manifests. And so their whole life they're doing stuff with just this little bit of like stored tension. And so as we like really receive, and I consider this receiving and loving and accurately meeting people, that original impulse, the original capacity for aliveness, the energy that was caught in that pattern returns to the blueprint to be available for a more full expression. So there's a part of me that feels really limited by staying in this rectangle.
That's where the aliveness wanted to go, somewhere else,
Get me
out
out
of
of
the
this
rectangle. I feel that a little bit too. I'm like, oh,
rectangle, standing in this like little like space, like staring. You see, like something about telling that story changed the energy, right? You feel it? Like we almost kind of like went into
yeah.
a constriction that was engaged in the story I was telling. So that's okay. Like the aliveness right now is in a little bit of that constriction. I'm curious what's happening for you.
Well, I noticed as you were telling this story, even though it was like super interesting to my mind, I was getting more and more tired. Like it was slowing my system down. Um, I'm not sure what that means, but I was appreciating when you started to just like when you brought some to me, you brought a different kind of flavor of aliveness by like leaving the screen and saying what you said. And then I was like, oh, now I can like move around and free myself. Um, yeah, because I think my energy wanted to move some.
You were receiving the story that I was telling, and you were
Mhm.
receiving energy underneath the kind of like the imprint or the pain involved in the story as I was telling it. This is my conclusion or assumption.
Mm.
Like we were going into the imprint. It has an energy.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm not. I was definitely following the story. I don't know if it was the specific example that you were giving, um, but something about yes, definitely something about the unraveling process that you were going into and the slowness at which you know the slowness and attunement. It was slowing my own system down. I mean, this whole interview has been where
Mhm.
then I was like aware of just really minute sensations inside my body. Um, yeah, I don't have an answer to why it was kind of leading me down, 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 down into a state of tiredness. But what I can say is that now that I'm moving, I feel a lot more of like the energy that wants to, like, this is the way that the energy wants to move right now in my being. Mhm.
Yeah, so I want to say, and this is another aspect of what's freeze aliveness, is now I feel like I did something wrong and I feel bad. And I realized I like misassumed and concluded what your experience was, and I feel bad about that.
No.
And I'm speaking this because it's what's alive.
Uh-huh.
Because the other thing that really nurtures aliveness is like total authenticity and
Mhm.
truth telling.
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
Stuff that maybe I probably somebody told me or in my mind, I was like, you would never publicly do that. Why would you do that publicly? Well, why am I doing it publicly is because I don't want to sit in that feeling, honestly.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I want to receive the part of me that feels like he did something wrong.
Mhm.
Yeah, looks like there's an inner child here.
Mhm.
Showed up in the midst of this interview.
So that speaks to something that might be interesting. I appreciate you sharing that and that we're having kind of a, in the moment experience together around the topic. That speaks to something that I am curious about or for you to speak to, which is so in naming, right? Like I do think it's probably true that in naming an authentic experience in the moment with someone, assuming that there's safety and trust, um, can be obviously supportive to aliveness. And I would be curious. What's your,
That's just my little one saying hi to
oh,
you.
okay. So I would be curious, right? Like in that process, so, my sense of knowing you is that aliveness includes the connection with other, obviously, in a pretty significant way. And this kind of reclaiming of aliveness and Eros. We're talking more about aliveness, but you could also speak to Eros. Um, and so what would you say is the role of the other in that exchange? Because I know you, right? And I know you enough to know that as you're naming that and you're naming this vulnerability in this interview, right? You're naming this younger part. You said it well, but you're receiving yourself while you're also connecting with me. So you're not like, there's not a kind of merging into me, right? Which could happen, which I think happens quite a bit for people. And I think that also happens in terms of aliveness and Eros, right? Right. We can say, oh, this person brought this out in me, or, I only feel love when right, when I'm, can, when this other person does this thing. And yet I would love for you to speak to that topic, because I think in the work that you do and in the world that you're immersed in, there is a deep connection with other, and there is a safety that and trust that is created with the other. And then there's also a self-responsibility piece that I know is also really present there.
Yeah, it's a good question. I've had a lot of learning about this the last few years in my life experiences. Um, so first thing, like, let's really, really get the reality. Like, our bodies are fully developed inside of a person. We basically, for the first many years of our life, never eat alone. We organize in families, communities, tribes. Like, there's nothing about us that's actually designed for optimum full expression without connection. Now, there's an aspect to humans and nervous system that is kind of very understood and undervalued, definitely in our culture, which is very much about rugged individualism, which is that our nervous systems are like feeling, sensing, expressing systems, but they're actually meant to be in close proximity with another. Because we're meant to have challenging experiences in our lives, but we're not actually meant to digest them and integrate them by ourselves. This is my belief.
Mhm.
And so the way I think about it was taught to me in the biodynamic cranial circle, sacral work, is that we're co-metabolizing our experiences together.
Mhm.
So as we sit together and slow down together, and if we were doing this in person, I may come up and sit next to you shoulder to shoulder, or hold your hand, or make a request to hold your hand. There would be something that starts to happen with our bodies. And suddenly I have access to more resources, which are in your being and in your life force. And you
Mhm.
have more access to resources, which are in my being and my life force.
Mhm.
Why do we, like, one of the reasons why do we have sex and intimacy with other people? There's more energy, and there's something that happens when people come together to exchange it.
Mhm.
And so the same thing happens on the regular. Like, why does a child come running to its parent when it's hurt, and why does the child get picked up? It's to hold the child in experience, to give them a nervous system, and to give their body a capacity to metabolize the overwhelm or the trigger.
Mhm.
It's a big aspect of work, and this work is the contact and the touch, and giving ourselves the nervous system resources to,
Mhm.
right. So as a child, we are a small nervous system, and the parents are the big nervous systems. So very much there's this kind of a tuning that happens. So if the parents are moving really, really fast all the time, then the child doesn't have the experience of coming towards somebody who's actually slow and centered. And so that child matches, not even by choice, it's just how the system works. Now, when that child grows up and goes and has to do work to slow down, because somehow they have that impulse in them, like, wow, I'm always fast, I need to slow down. They go and they seek other people. And this is part of the process. It's like, if you want more aliveness, if you want healing, you need to seek out people that are inhabiting and embodying themselves in a way that you want. Because you're not going to do it. Sorry, you're not going to do it sitting in a cave meditating. Because that's not how the wounding happened. The wounding happened in relationship. The wounding happened in this collective field. Now you have to step yourself into coherent, grounded, centered fields of other nervous systems. Touch the vulnerability of being that young child by telling your story, and then perceiving what's actually happening now and letting the two meet. Once that happens, then it's much easier to hold your own little one. So part of the healing process is kind of like semi-parenting from someone else. But once you get actually like current and individuated enough, that style of relating, of needing someone to hold a particular environment for me, that is a therapeutic context and doesn't actually work with two adults in an intimate relationship. I'm just making the leap to the piece that you spoke to at the end.
Yeah.
What is an adult?
Yeah. I mean, it speaks to me, though, I think, whether it's any kind of intimate relationship, right, that we can still hold that larger space for each other, and that co-regulation is just about learning. I think each person, I mean, this is something that I am a stand for, and that I think I'm skilled at, actually, about holding space, holding the space for the other person as they're having their experience, but not taking on, not, I could have responded to you. I might have my own response to what you said before. I mean, I did have a little bit of a response. And it's like, can I see you as this is just an expression of that little one in you, right? That's naming that, and that you're holding yourself, and that I can actually hold a larger space for you. And then simultaneously, I can have whatever response I have, and I can hold that part of me, which I think you're right. We learn I'm in complete agreement that once the trauma or the wounding that we experienced in relationship, we do need to re-experience it in a safe relationship. And then we learn how to internalize that more and more. I mean, children who are raised in, people who have more secure attachment, were raised in environments where they're like full, more of their aliveness could come out, may have learned how to do that already. And so I think it seems like it's a very intricate and subtle dance between self and other.
Yeah.
But I love that you are speaking to the piece that I think sometimes gets thrown out in self-development circles or spiritual circles, like, oh, you can just, do the work on your own and you don't need this other person, which I think, there's a beauty of needing each other. And then there's a sort of health and wholeness and rightness to how we, how we can learn to, I mean, I would say almost, I want to make use isn't the right word, but be held and co-regulate with others in intimate contexts.
Yes. But there's a different experience of being an adult who's co-regulating with another adult.
Yeah.
The little one is co-regulating with another adult inside. And this is a tricky dynamic because I know in our circles, for example, I'll just say this, like people in their 20s, people in their 30s, like certain aspects of stages of development, there's a sense of completeness that people are looking for in their developmental process that wasn't there for them as when they were with their family. That seeking leads to attraction to people that create a context that allows you to recreate the original dynamic,
Mhm.
which often leads to this context of bonding in the dynamic of the trauma or the overwhelm. And then they wonder why their relationships don't end up working. Sometimes they do, but then there's other problems that get created in the dynamic, right? There's this like been this like specific kind of learning for me around like, wow, like my adult relationships are for my adult self, they're not for my young self. And if they are for my young self, then let me be intentional about it. Let me use my friendships for that. Let it be like clear and intentional. Because then that allows a sense of containment for the experience. So I know we're going into like terrain that's a little off the topic of our original like conversation, our original intention for speaking, but it's here. It feels alive.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's part of, I mean, yeah, I was just thinking that too. And not that we're off the topic, but I think it's a really important topic, what we're speaking to. And what I hear in your world, and also knowing you, that you have a very clear sense of when your little one now, at this point, when your little one is kind of running the show or trying to run the show, so that you can bring in your adult self or other forms of support, instead of sort of seeking it from somebody in a way that's going to be sort of create a lot of complexity and is not sort of the right relationship to do that in.
Right.
And I imagine different people have different ways of sort of identifying that.
Yes.
I'm trying to, we don't have so much more time left. So I was thinking, how do we come back to the, like, what are some like juicy things or ending points we want to make about aliveness and Eros? And I think there's something relevant here. I mean, I'm trying to,
Yeah. I
there's
want to
a
talk.
relevancy, because I actually think that it's a bit of a thwarted it's a bit of a way that aliveness gets thwarted or Eros gets thwarted. Like the fullness of what we're trying to express and how kind of, I think, becomes sort of pigeonholed and small, and we end up sort of acting out imprints or wounding, rather than actually moving towards like our inherent and natural aliveness. But so you can speak more to that, but that's what came through.
Yeah, totally. So like I spoke earlier in the beginning about this dynamic of there's an original impulse and then there's the imprinting, and the aliveness gets caught in the imprinting.
Mm-hmm.
So that imprinting, you could say, is also the challenging experience of the inner little one, and that part is trying to get through,
Mm-hmm.
get healed, so that like that impulse to grow doesn't stop, so that impulse to be seen in my story, to be received in, it just keeps repeating itself and repeating itself.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And in the child parent relationship, there's a love and attachment. There's a specific kind of love and attachment dynamic of provider and the one being provided for, right? There is, of course, a reverse loop that comes from the child in terms of loving the parent, but there's this particular kind of dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
In an adult dynamic, that's ideally not what's happening between two adults.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking to the same thing again, but here's the difference between being a child and being an adult in terms of capacities for Eros. So let's say, like, this thing around not just aliveness, but also around Eros, is that unfortunately, our capacity for sensation and feeling and pleasure gets downloaded from our family and our ancestors.
Mm-hmm.
As a descendant of multiple non-survivors of the Holocaust, and survivors, obviously, like there's such a constriction around just feeling good all the time. Like, no, I don't like get to deserve to feel good. Like I should just be grateful that I'm alive.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like there's this way that there's like in that challenge in the kind of Jewish inheritance around the Holocaust, where who am I to be free and alive? I need to honor those that are dead by still being with them in the deadness. That's just one layer.
Mhm.
But this piece that really wants to come through is that's the thing that I spoke to earlier with the trees. It says, I look out the window, there's a verticalness, right? There's an opening to the sky. There's a down current down to the earth, right? So this down current, for example, just to be frank, like my family didn't have access to this current because there was so much constriction and trauma, and it's so scary to actually be on the earth.
Mhm.
But now, thanks to the work that I've done and the continuum practices, years of doing that, I have access to these blueprint ways of experiencing aliveness and resource. I can allow the downward current of energy. I can enjoy the upward current of life force. I can feel the expansion of my heart into the space. I can feel the nourishing, like loving support in my back of my ancestors.
Mhm.
I bring all of that now into adult relationship. But if I'm in my little one who did not have those experiences or the capacity for those things because my parents, the ancestors didn't have those capacities, then I can't bring those into the relating
Mhm.
because he doesn't know them. So in terms of accessing like Eros, like in the Jews that survived and that didn't survive, like, well, the descendants, I'll say, of that kind of trauma, they don't feel safe enough to actually get that there's a cosmic level of continuous stream of nourishment,
Mhm.
therefore, all the time.
Mhm.
If we feel safe, if we slow down, if we cultivate that pathway to receive it. Fundamentally, I have to be receptive to the outside world in order to also allow that nourishment to stream.
Mhm. Hmm. I want to speak that was beautiful. And I want to speak to something because I think it brings in another layer of the work that you're only getting to now. Which it strikes me. I mean, it's so multi-layered, right? Because I think it's like you could maybe even give a short blurb on continuum so people know what that is. But also thinking of like my own experiences with authentic movement or craniosacral therapy, um, that how much that sort of has also allowed me to, I mean, all kinds of experiences I've had in my life, but allowed me to experience different shades and textures and depths of aliveness, like experienced through the body. But then it's like this interesting. So I think it's both what you said about sort of summarizing even like what the work you do with Ray, where you like, it's like you have to know what you start to know what you want. It might be like, oh, I want to be able to express anger, right? And then that opens up other channels that creates more healing, that allows for more receiving. And I think that's also true with like ancestral work, right? Like I know for me, just tapping into learning things about how my Jewish lineage and my ancestors, like how that's informed how I am or what I have internalized, that in and of itself has created more space for that kind of receiving, but then also actually having the experiences, to like continuum or other things that, so it just feels like it's obviously it's like a living breathing organism. That's what it strikes me as. It's something that it doesn't, like things that come into our environment, things that we learn can open up channels, and then there's places where we will still have stuckness, or where like, wow, I'm not capable of receiving that right now. That's
Yes.
interesting. Yeah, so
Yeah. So one piece is meeting the story, right? The other piece is laying down in new capacities. by saying laying down, I mean like neurologically laying those things down. So the way that my healing process worked is I was moving so much from this womb surround ray space. And then I'd go to these long continuum workshops, like 7 days, 5 days, 10 days. And just to speak a little bit to continuum so you get a sense, it was also created by a descendant of Holocaust survivors.
Interesting.
Emily Conrad, Jew from New York. We use sound, our own sound, we make our own sounds to basically soften tension, density, introduce vibration into the body. And we awaken the water in the body. And when you have a room of people that are all slowing down and making sounds and pausing and slowing down and making sounds, it creates a kind of very dense, loving, holding field. And we're not interested so much in that work at all about story. We just let the biological intelligence of movement and this, we invite and we kind of have that intention of that movement of love, of Eros into the space. And it's kind of like a mystery, it is a mystery school practice where we just acknowledge that we are not in individual control of our own healing. And if we give ourselves up to this greater organizing force and the intelligence that's inside of us, we can receive nourishment from everything. And then our body reorganizes. Just a lot of body reorganizing. And for me, I used it very much for this integration. So the storytelling was done here, the release, the touching of the trauma, the releasing of it, the deep integration, and the new capacities for arriving into my body and being able to feel even more happen in the continuum. And so I was in a room with these amazing teachers whose capacity to slow down and to move was like nothing I've seen anywhere else. And after a lot of hours, I got almost 500 hours with Emily and then many other teachers, it seeps into my being. And now my body has access to something that my parents and ancestors never had access to. So getting to wholeness, getting to full expression, in my experience, requires both.
Beautiful. That's such a beautiful place to end. I mean, it also really speaks to I think our inherent capacity towards wholeness, towards growth, towards, sort of, we could say, aliveness and Eros. And also, I think the last part of what you spoke to, again, speaks to the importance of attuning in relationship. Like that's a deep form of attunement, in a, like you said, the transmission of being in that room for that many hours with others in that space, and how that translates into your own, experience. So, yeah.
And then what I can offer other people.
Yeah.
What happened? What am I bringing in my intimacy? Right? It's like, it's completely different than this kind of like shut down body that I would say a lot of people have in our culture, that's disconnected from the earth, that's disconnected from the sky, that doesn't know how to be in the relational field. Like, and this is why it's like a passion of mine. Like, I didn't have those capacities because of my history. But I knew something inside me was like, no, this is not all there is. I don't have to live with all this like chronic pain, and I don't have to live with all of these limitations.
Beautiful. Well, we actually we could keep riffing, and we've gone for quite a while. So yeah, you just what in your ending you said how you work with others. So actually, as an ending here, this was I'm actually experiencing a lot of pleasure in this conversation, like in different parts of my body. I've really enjoyed it.
Mm,
And I'd love for you to share with people, how they can learn more about your work and work with you.
sure. They can go to my website, which is just elan.org, elan.org. I think I'll paste the link after the down below around scheduling for both my website and also scheduling. Um, and yeah, I'm inviting like passionate, vibrant people that are like called to
Mm.
really committed to their own freedom and their own embodiment. Um, and that really just feel really, really called to work with me. So
Beautiful. Thank you. Mm.
yeah, thank you, Lori, for me, it's like again, I feel, um, I feel received.
Mm.
Yeah, I feel very cold as well because I turned off the heat so that the fans wouldn't blow onto the
Mm.
microphone. So I'm both cold and I also have this like heart warmth,
Mm. Mm.
just a sense of
Mm.
gratitude for you.
Mm. Thank you. Mm. Yeah, I really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you so much for just offering. I both feel like we got to address the content of what we wanted to, and then also just the just you being in your own aliveness and really bringing that into the space. Yeah, it's really fun to play with you in that way. Yeah.
Mm.
So this show happens every week, or well, this show happens every week with some breaks. And yeah, if you're interested, if you're just kind of tuning into me, I do a lot of different things. And I'm offering really tailor-made mentorships for both men and women. I've extended my work, and I've always worked with men, but I've extended my work to work with men here. And it's let's see if I can. I'm really stepping into working with people from more of a place of expansiveness and freedom. And then all the healing and transformational work that we do sort of we start from a place of expansion. And I teach you a lot about how to be in a bigger space and how to use how to cultivate practices that allow for healing to be more, more enjoyable, I would say. So if you're interested in working with me, you can, and then also just like moving towards what you want, your desires in your life, whatever those desires are, and clearing what's in the way of that, but doing that in a way that just feels a lot more easeful. Um, that's the road that I have been on and am excited to offer to others right now.
Yeah,
So
just
here, go ahead.
I
Yeah.
want to add to just like it's a gift to have your presence,
Mm.
your full attention.
Mm.
And that in and of itself is like a massive thing that people get from working with you.
Mm. Thank you. Mm.
Yeah.
Mm. Yay. Well, thank you, everyone. And I will see you next week. Okay. Bye.